Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are. Hosted by Desiree Duffy.
Welcome, one and all, to the Books That Make You show. I'm your host, Desiree Duffy. And today we are talking about books that make you want to join the call for a revitalized labor movement. Yeah, there's a lot that we're going to talk about in this show. You're all probably aware of the contributions that the labor leader and civil rights activist Cesar Chavez has made in our world. The topic we're going to discuss today is brought to the forefront in a new historical fiction novel called The Road to Delano. In it, author John DeSimone introduces us to Jack Duncan, who dreams of playing college baseball and leaving the political turmoil of the agricultural town that he lives in behind. But that might not be possible, as we discover as we read this gripping story. Now, the author is a published writer. He's a novelist and a teacher. He's been an adjunct professor and holds an MFA in creative writing from Spalding University. He has recently also co-authored books that include Broken Circle, a memoir of escaping Afghanistan, as well as Courage to Say No by Dr. Raana Mahmood. And I might have pronounced her name wrong.
You did good.
Did I? Okay, yeah. Good. I was like, that's a little bit different. And her struggles against sexual exploitation as a female physician. He has published another novel called Leonardo's Chair, which was published in 2005. And get this, in 2012, congratulations, you won the prestigious Norman Mailer Fellowship. And that's what helped you complete this book. So without further ado, Mr. John DeSimone, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show today. This is a real delight.
I am excited to have you here. So first, let's kind of set things up in a couple of different ways. First, tell us about your book. And if you don't mind, I think it might help us to have a bit of a history lesson on Cesar Chavez too, because that's all intertwined. So if you could start with that.
Well, the groundwork of the book is it's set in the Central Valley of California, and that's the fruit and nut center of our country. I mean, about 50% of our fruit and vegetables come from the Central Valley. And around Delano, it's a small town about 30 miles north of Bakersfield. It's the huge table grape growing area. And it's been the table grape growing area since the time of John Steinbeck and the Grapes of Wrath. So the 30s, prior to that, it was a large wheat growing area. But when the water project came in and they could irrigate it, they went into more lucrative crops. So fruit picking, migrant workers has always been a topic in the Central Valley. And before Mexicans and Filipinos, it was the Japanese workers, it was the Chinese workers, it was the Okies, then the Oklahoma, the refugees from the Dust Bowl, which most people are familiar with. And the labor practices in the valley were always rather shabby. If they were migrant workers, so the growers didn't provide much for them. It was a very low wage, a very hard work, and there was always a churning of labor and a desire for better working conditions. And so, but these would either someone went on strike and they wanted better wages, better working conditions, and the growers in the 20s and the 30s banded together, and not all of them. Some of them were, gave their workers more money or sectioned off top places for housing, but in the main, it was very brutal work in the hottest conditions. So Cesar Chavez and his family came to the valley in the 40s, and they came from Arizona. They're citizens, and they had lost their farm in the 30s. Excuse me, so it would have been the late 30s, early 40s, and they went, from just the circuit from the Imperial Valley, and as the summer went on, they just moved north into Oxnard into the valley. And so Cesar Chavez, a young man, and his two brothers and sisters, they knew what the working conditions were. They were very brutal. And there was always a desire to organize and to do something for the poor people of the area. And probably there were a dozen movements. None of them were successful because the growers were very good at organizing. And they had a particular tactic. If the strikers would go out of the fields, they'd be on the road, they'd be picketing. Then what would happen is the growers would send thugs among them, start a fight. When the strikers sought revenge and struck back, well then now you had a case where they could call on the sheriff, arrest the strikers, and so it was just a treadmill of chaos. And Cesar Chavez, as a young man, tried to leave the fields, and he was in his 20s, and his brother left the field, became a car salesman, and another one became a carpenter, and they somehow Cesar Chavez got connected with a Catholic priest and an organizer who told him about, asked him, challenged him, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about, are you just going to let your kids grow up in these poor conditions, and you're just going to perpetuate it? It's just going on again. And he was recruited to work with Saul Alinsky's community organization, and he learned how to organize poor people. In other words, get them identification so they could vote, get them connected with healthcare in the areas. And Cesar Chavez did that for about 10 years, became an amazing organizer. He knew how to go into a town and meet people, organize meetings, direct them, develop leadership. And but his heart never forgot what his experiences were. He was moving out of the poor economic class into the middle class, but his heart never forgot. He never forgot what it was to work in the fields. And the opportunity came up for him to work with for 1 year in Oxnard, to work with a group of young men who were working in the lettuce fields there in Oxnard, and to see if he could organize a union. And at that time, this was in the late 50s, the braceros were still there. So the growers were supposed to pick local workers first out of a workforce. And then if there weren't enough, they could take the braceros. Remember, the braceros were the Mexican citizens who came up during World War II to help pick. And he discovered there was just so much manipulation, and the braceros were used in place of the citizens, and the braceros worked for half the rate of a citizen. Yeah. So it was very abusive. So long story short, in the 60s, he decided to leave the community organization and start a union. No one had ever been successful to start a grape workers union, because the migrants would just move on, after the season was over. He chose Delano because grape growers need workers all year round. So the workers there would settle into these impoverished communities and work for less than minimum wage. And in very impoverished conditions. So he started forming his unions 62, 61. And by 1965, the Filipinos, so the growers kept the Filipinos and the Mexicans and the black workers all separate. So if the Filipinos went on strike, they could just go over to the Mexican camp and get the Mexicans and bring them over, vice versa. So it was a very, they played one race against the other. In 65, the Filipinos working in a large ranch went on strike, and they went over to the Mexicans, to Cesar Chavez, and said, "Would you join us?" He didn't think he was strong enough in 65. He'd only been organizing for 3 years, only had a couple of thousand members. He wanted to wait until he had about 10,000 members. But they decided to join him. So the strike was going from 65 to 68 when my book comes in. And so in those 3 years, the workers are out of the fields. They have no wages. They're working other jobs to strike. And the growers would not speak to them. They would not even sit down and ask them, okay, what are your grievances? What can we do to make this better? Their view was the Mexicans will just go away. They'll just float away and we'll get a new ones, or we'll bust more in from Mexicali and we'll just be done with it. And so there was both a prejudice issue there and a financial issue. So Cesar Chavez, in his mind, had learned about the uses of nonviolence and based all of his work on nonviolence. He would not hire thugs to go and destroy the fields or in any way commit any violence against the growers. Not that there wasn't any, but his policy was not to commit any. So when the growers started their usual harassment tactics, running trucks up and down the streets where the strikers were and running over their feet or hitting them or threatening them or sending thugs into their crowds, his instruction to his people were, no one strikes back. We just walk away. Because the minute we strike back, then we are going to be the cause of it. We will get arrested. We will go to jail. And everything we've worked for will be lost. No one had ever tried that before.
And I think that's something really important to just highlight, because that was one of the main things that Mr. Chavez was known for, was this tactic. And I feel like we can bring that into the present day. Because there's a lot of protests and there's a lot of things that are going on right now. And you have these agitators that are coming in trying to make the other side look bad. And this isn't a new tactic. This was something that, yeah.
It had been around quite a while, because once violence breaks out, whatever you're asking for, whatever reforms you want, get pushed into the background. And now you have to look at the burned out buildings or the destroyed crops, or whatever destruction comes about. That doesn't go away, and that creates such bad blood and bad relationships that whatever you do get out of it, it's not what you really want. What you want, what Cesar Chavez wanted, was the growers to treat them as equals. We're not your dogs. We're not your just your little puppies. We're not just farm implements. We're not wage slaves. We're people. And so he was asking for very simple things. Okay, he was not asking for free things. He was just asking for a minimum wage, water in the fields, toilets to be close to where you worked, and restrictions on when it was heat. When it was too hot to work, restrictions and some type of relief, and freedom from being sprayed on by pesticides, and basic things that
exactly.
Yeah,
I'm here in Southern California, so I know the Central Valley. I have a sister who lives in Bakersfield. I know how hot. Yes,
it's cold during the winter. And it's extremely hot. That's why it's such good grape growing area, because it has to get up to a certain temperature for the grapes to get that sweetness. Good grapes don't grow in cold temperatures. So in 1968, when my book is set, the two sides have been really tense. There's been some violent breakouts. The thugs or the guards that the owners had hired were doing dirty tricks with the strikers. There was injuries, and certain people among Chavez's followers, among the union members, were talking about going and becoming armed and striking back. They're tired of it. They say, we're tired of being treated this way. If they come at us, we're going to come at them. So Cesar Chavez's tactic was, he knew they worked so hard to get to this point. If that happened, everything would be lost, because then the sheriff would come in, arrest. The sheriff didn't arrest the ones who caused it. They arrest the strikers.
Yeah.
And there's a big story about that. So in my story, set in 1968 in the spring, my two characters, Jack Duncan, a high school senior, son of a grower, and Adrian Sanchez, a high school senior, son of a field worker, who works for Cesar Chavez, are high school teammates, best friends, star athletes, and they're ready to move off out of this highly charged political world into a college career. They've worked very hard. They're excellent baseball players, great athletes. And when they run into a deep moral dilemma, and that's the story that I put together here, based on a lot of fact, but the characters are fictional, but the moral dilemma that the characters are in is true.
Right.
And they have deep moral quandaries. And we're not talking about, are they going to smoke marijuana? Or are they going to have sex with the girlfriend? We're talking about deeper issues here that have lifelong implications of what type of person they're going to be. And so they are highly influenced by Cesar Chavez in his call for nonviolence in different ways. And the book challenges them to, the storyline challenges them to solve their problems through using nonviolence. Very challenging, very difficult. And that's the essence of the story.
And in a lot of ways, this is a coming of age story for young men, for young people to have this turmoil of, let's do the thing that we want to do, the fun thing, the amazing thing, or being true to your heritage and to doing what's right.
There's a lot to speak to that about. Yes, it's a combination of a true coming of age story. So Jack Duncan, unlike Adrian Sanchez, who goes home every night to the poor side of town, to where his father is dealing with these things on a nightly basis, is aware of what it means to be the son of a farm worker, to be considered Mexican-American, low class, different because you work in the fields and not eligible to be part of the white community. So Jack Duncan, on the other hand, goes home to the other side of town. And so they each learn from each other. Jack has a true coming of age arc and a social awareness arc. I mean, he grows up as a young man into a man to confront issues that are prevalent today. So the way he deals with it, the way he solves his problems, I think it's a great moral fable for today.
Tell me why did you write this story? Why did you feel compelled? And congratulations,
Thank you.
You won the Norman Mailer Fellowship in order to do this, right?
It really did help me finish it. Got a whole draft done. But after that, I wrote another draft. So I probably have gone through 5 drafts for the book. And that was a critical moment in my writing. I won the fellowship. I got to live in Provincetown on Cape Cod for a month, and we workshopped the book with other writers at Norman Mailer's house. And so he bequeathed that house when he died to a writer's colony. It's a very generous time, a very excellent time. So the question was, how is it relevant for today? Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. So,
I was waiting. Yes, tell me.
It's relevant today because, we've just gone through this horrible time of protesting. Okay. Protesting is necessary and important part of our American culture. Okay. We believe that our society improves through raised voices of the people. Okay. We don't live in a dictatorship that tells us, how things are going to be. But our philosophy of government is that, people rule, men and women rule through the consent of the governed. So if the governed don't like how they're being governed, if the people don't like how they're being governed, they have a say in it. The problem is once that moves over from civil disobedience or to nonviolent protest into violence, and homes are looted, businesses are burned, streets are taken over, law and order is lost. The message that you're conveying is tainted, is diluted.
Right.
So
because that's what people see. That's unfortunate. And we could probably have an entire conversation too, just about the media and the news and how things are portrayed, because all we see, there can be an entire day's worth of protests.
Yes.
Peaceful people standing together in solidarity, doing a good thing, coming together, helping each other, supporting each other. And it takes just one incident, one unfortunate incident. And it may, like we were talking about before, not even be caused by the people who are actually there protesting. It could be an outside influence, but then that's all we see on the news. That's all we hear about. And that's what taints our perception.
Absolutely. And in our society, protest is really the ability to protest, the ability to speak your mind in a free society, and to ask for redress of grievances is part of our culture.
Mm-hmm.
No governing system is perfect. And if the people don't stand up, there's so many protests that go on in every community. And maybe protest is the wrong word, but organizing for change is something what communities do all throughout this country. If you want a stop sign put up in your corner because it's dangerous for your kids to cross the street, you can organize a petition and go down to City Hall and get a stop sign put in. That's the type of society that we live in. It can address change. The problem
Mm-hmm.
is when reform doesn't work, when the institutions are so solidified that they don't move, and that's when there's real trouble. I don't think we're ever at that point,
Mm-hmm.
but in the 5 years that Cesar Chavez was on strike, 65 to 1970, it was 1969, 1970 when they signed their first contract with all the grape growers around the Delano area, something that had never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
Growers had never sat down in unison with their workers and treated them as equals across the table. That had never happened.
Mm-hmm.
And what he accomplished through nonviolence should not be forgotten. That's you asked me why I wrote this book and why me. In the course of teaching, I had students doing essays, and one of the series of essays was on civil disobedience, and we started reading about Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King and their different movements. And I knew about Martin Luther King, and I'm a Californian, and I knew about Cesar Chavez, but I didn't know how deep his philosophy impacted the changes that he brought about for his workers. And as I looked at the literature, there were lots of nonfiction books written. and I'm a fiction writer, and I thought, this is something that should be really talked about. So one of my great joys was giving a book to his son, Paul Chavez.
Okay.
So Paul Chavez is now the president of the Chavez Foundation, and they're up at Keene, in the same buildings where the UFW had their headquarters. And he really enjoyed it. So, they're more focused on telling the true story. And I say, well,
sure.
People, but there's a segment of people that really like the moral fables. And that's what I tried to write. It's a combination of history and a little bit of a fable concerning Jack, his coming of age.
Exactly. And how do you feel that the labor movement should be revitalized today? Because that's part of your message too.
Well, it is. It's an element in there. It's a theme in there. Here's the interesting thing. In 1933, when FDR signed the National Labor Relations Act that allowed employees to participate in collective bargaining. Now, prior to that, the only way employees could gather together was it created a very tense relationship with management. So now they had a right to hold a secret ballot because the FDR, the only way he could get this legislation approved, he had to cave to the Southern Democrats, and they wanted to exclude two categories of workers. Mm-hmm. One category was domestic help. I mean, think about it. Who were all the domestic helps in the South?
Right.
They were Black women.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no way that Southern gentlemen were going to sit down and negotiate in equal basis with their domestic help. And then the other was farm workers, because a lot of the farm workers was done by sharecroppers in the South. So those two categories were excluded. And that's the source of all of this trouble that ends with Cesar Chavez, because in the 70s, California becomes the very first state to authorize farm workers to legally organize together as a group. So this, in the 30s, there was a lot of communist organizers in California, but once he signed that bill, it was legal, all the communists left, because there's no reason now to embrace a communist ideology when all you have to do is have a secret ballot. So a lot of the violence left the labor movement and out of organizing. So as of today, unions are an important part of our society, because they give employees the opportunity to sit down with management as equal partners in the business, not as financial partners, but certainly they're exchanging their labor for a wage. Exactly. and to organize. So as long as the unions do not embrace the corruption that led to their organization, then unions become a good thing, and they become an essential part. In the 70s, when it happens all over again, the Teamsters come in, and they're the example of the corrupt union.
That's the other end of the spectrum. Exactly.
That's the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So unions can cut both ways. If they embrace, they become rigid and embrace the tactics that they once were demonstrating against, and the rigidity and the corruption, then the unions become a bad thing. Cesar Chavez's union revitalized. It's still the largest agricultural union in the country. It's enabled workers to have a decent wage, a decent living conditions, and for their children to move out of the fields as a way to better their lives and to pursue the American dream.
Exactly.
Unions have brought have raised the standard of employees' working conditions and standards and wages. So just their being there creates competition for other workers that employers have to match.
Right. And that is an excellent, excellent thing. We're running really tight here on time. So, but I did want to really quickly just mention you have Broken Circle, a memoir of escaping Afghanistan, and Courage to Say No, as well as Leonardo's Chair. And of course, the book we're talking about right now, Road to Delano. So tell people where people can find you, find your books, follow you on social media, get more information.
I'm on Facebook, obviously, John DeSimone, author. Of course, my books are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound, all the Books A Million. And of course, you can buy from my website. Rare Bird is the publisher in Los Angeles. You can buy from their website. Just put in The Road to Delano and you will find the book into any search engine. It's all over the place. And I just really want to thank you for hosting me today. This has been a wonderful experience, and I hope your readers enjoy it.
Thank you, John. I appreciate you being here. This has been a great conversation. I have a feeling we could go on and on. There's so much to unpack here, not only with this current book, but with the other books too. So maybe we'll have you back again sometime, okay?
Excellent. Love that.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well here on the Books That Make You show. I have been your host, Desiree Duffy, and you can find out more about us on our website. That is booksthatmakeyou.com. You can also follow us. We're on Facebook and Instagram and on YouTube as well, where we encourage you to subscribe so you never miss one of our shows. Also, don't forget to sign up for our newsletter. We're always doing fun bookish giveaways and bringing you the latest news and information about the books that make you exactly who you are.
The executive producer for Books That Make You is Desiree Duffy. Produced and sound mastered by Phil Giangrande. Engineering by Dave Nabox. Social media and promotion by Bree Sweeter. For more, visit booksthatmakeyou.com.